But fundamentally, if those coaches go hard from day one, it's incredibly rare that they won't see kids breaking down. Yesterday in clinic, two kids came to see me. One had heel pain, one had knee pain, and you kind of go, what's been happening? Oh, I've just started preseason again.
Angela, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much indeed for having me.
You are my go-to on all things youth training, overuse injuries, stress injuries. There is a ton to talk about today because right now, as we're recording this, we are in the middle of preseason for a lot of our athletes. And man, this is the time of year where I get a little panic attack because I just see so much nonsense going on. I had one girl tell me the other day that their coach had them doing full field broad jumps with followed by 6 sets of 20 skater jumps. And these are 14-year-old girls who are growing. And the first thing I thought was their knees. So, we're going to talk all about overuse injuries today and what causes them and what we can do about them and how we can reduce the chance the best we can. So, there's a lot of things that go into this. So, let's start with a 1,000-foot view. Let's define overuse injury and then give the types that a lot of our young athletes experience.
Great question. So, I think we've lumped these overuse injuries together. And I think sometimes that gives the impression that many of these injuries are due to doing too much. But my kind of first comment would be around it's usually not that kids are at risk of doing too much, but they're doing too much too soon. So when we see these big spikes in activity throughout the year, and one of the biggest things that we're going to see is like the change in season, the beginning of the season, what happens is that, particularly in kids who are growing very quickly, not just a lot, but very quickly, the poor little muscles are always in a bit of a lag. They're always just a little bit behind the bone. So the bone grows and then their muscles grow. And where those muscles attach to the bone is usually via a tendon to a small bit of immature bone in these kids. And so what happens is we get a lot of traction type forces on muscles like the quadriceps at the front of the thigh as it attaches on to the front of the knee and the shin bone there. And quite commonly, where that irritation occurs at the point where the tendon attaches to the bone, we call that osgood's. Where the calf muscle attaches to the Achilles tendon and that attaches to the heel bone, we call that severs. Now, in truth, everywhere that a muscle attaches via a tendon to a bone, they have a different, they have a name, a posh name called an apophysis. I call them apops because I can't spell apophysis. So apops are where the tendon attaches to the immature growth plate, and that can occur throughout the body. And as I say, most commonly, we see these at the heel and then at the knee. And what tends to happen is kids grow from the foot first. So ahead of puberty, they'll be growing like crazy big feet, and they always look like they've got flippers on. And so that foot's begun to grow. And what we tend to see then is the bone growth outstrips the rate at which these poor little muscles and tendons can adapt. And we get this tugging on the growth plate. So they start to occur most commonly around the foot. And then as the shin bone grows, we start to see these apop injuries or the point of tendon attachment to the bone at the knee. And that can occur at any of those muscle attachments in the knee before they move up to the hip.
Now, I've heard some girls say that with Osgood-Schroeder, for example, the pain is very intermittent. So 1 week it will be like a 7 out of 10 pain, like they can't jog or play soccer. And then 2 weeks later, they're totally fine. What's going on with that?
So a couple of explanations, but I think fundamentally the pain associated with these APOP injuries is essentially going to occur when they've overstretched stretched and overused those muscles. So if they have like a spike in activity for the next 2 weeks, you'll get like an inflammatory reaction. And then generally they'll get used to it. The body adapts to it and they're getting a little bit fitter for that sport. And the pain will usually settle down. If they then experience another growth spurt, or if they perhaps have maybe different sort of things that reduce their capacity to tolerate that load, maybe they've not slept that well, maybe they're not eating as well, then they won't tolerate what they normally do. So sometimes, even if they've just had a stressy day at school, then when they go and train that evening, they end up more sore. So it's this balancing act between doing too much too soon that exceeds their current capacity, and a drop in their battery often to tolerate that capacity, that load. So it's a little bit of a seesaw type thing. And I think that can be really confusing for PE teachers, soccer coaches, and the kids and parents, because as you rightly say, some weeks they seem to cope. Well, maybe they slept better, maybe they ate better, maybe they had a little bit more recovery. And then the next week, something else happens that's not immediately obvious. And perhaps they did more intense training or back-to-back days of training, and suddenly the body's not coped again. And every flare-up generally is followed by like a 2-week irritation to that tendon attachment.
Oh, super interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too, with just the spikes in load causing that immediate inflammation. Now, how can like athletes work around that? Because a lot of these kids, they have really busy schedules, even in the quote unquote off season. They're doing like more like skills training, they're on a separate soccer team or playing like futsal. How can that impact these injuries?
We need to be probably pretty clear in terms of I don't get too excited about them doing a lot of sport if they're tolerating it well. So we used to have an adage that said 12-year-olds could do 12 hours of structured sport, 13-year-olds could do 13 hours of structured sport. And frankly, to me, that's rubbish, because if they haven't done a build up to that 12 hours or that 13 hours over a graduated build into the season, then they're not going to be ready to tolerate any number of hours. So they've got to earn the right to do that level of training. So what we need to do is really educate everybody that perhaps maybe our school soccer season in the UK would start around and about the 1st of September. So they should now be beginning to try and build up their fitness levels for that sport. It doesn't matter if they've been playing tennis all summer or they've been playing baseball all summer and they go, yeah, no, I'm super, super fit. They're not soccer fit. And they may have been playing small-sided games like futsal or 2-on-2s, 3-on-3s, but have they actually trained on a full-size 11-a-side pitch? So the demands on our energy systems, the demands on our muscles are very, very different across the different sports. So they need to kind of give themselves adequate time ahead of the start of the season to do that slow build up. If the body has time to adapt to it's being subjected to, it lays down more muscle. We know that when we go to the gym. If we do like a slow build up in the weights that we're doing, over time we need to put more and more weight on to see those increments in strength. And the bone is exactly the same. So what we've got to remember is that in these growing pain type things that we're seeing, these growth related overuse injuries, it's the tendon attachment on the soft skeleton of the immature sort of adolescent. And so they're much more sort of likely to get injuries that affect the bone, not the tendon in a child.
Now, I want to talk about strength because I think a lot of people think, well, like if my daughter's doing her strength training, she won't be susceptible to overuse injuries because she's strong and she can handle the demands. But I like the point that you made that the sport specific load, it has to be gradual. And that's why I said like, yes, after I train my athlete strength in the summer, I still get a heart attack when preseason comes because I know on day one, a lot of these coaches are going from 0 to 100 miles per hour. And even in a well strength trained athlete, they could still be susceptible to overuse with that load.
So I think there's some really good points that you make there. Let's pick up on this idea that the child basically has a current capacity, and that's a combination of how much training they've done for that sport, and then it's a combination of factors such as how strong they are, um, whether they're in a big growth spurt, whether they're sleeping well, whether they're stressed at the moment, and then how well they're eating. So if the kid is basically going to go hard in training, they need to know that their battery is full. And so they need to kind of go, right, if my body's under pressure and I'm at the start of a new season and I really want to kind of push myself in training, then the strength training will have increased their battery. It will have increased their resilience. But they've still got to try and look at all the other things. They've still got to try and do good sleep, good nutrition, and take care when they've finished training that they warm down properly. Do they warm up properly? So there's lots of ways in which they can boost their capacity to do more. But fundamentally, if those coaches go hard from day one, it's incredibly rare that they won't see kids breaking down. And I think we're moving forwards on this through education, but there's still, like yesterday in clinic, 2 kids came to see me. One had heel pain, one had knee pain, and you kind of go, what's been happening? Oh, I've just started pre-seasoning again. And so I said, well, how did it go? Well, we had to do loads and loads of scissor lunge jumps. They're like you jump from lunge to lunge to lunge. And then we did tons of sprint training. I said, oh, when was the last time you did that? Oh, last season. Yeah. So I think we've just got to remember that the coaches kind of feel like, right, we've got to hit the ground running and we don't want to waste any time and these kids need to get fit. But actually, in an adult world, we'd never do a marathon without training. We'd never even do a 10K without training. So why is it we think that kids can go from not having done that sport for maybe 2-3 months to suddenly being able to do it at high intensity? So I think my message to the coach is, you're better off if you've got 4 or 6 weeks to the start of the season, doing a gradual build up and having the whole squad available at the start of the season, than breaking a third of them at the very beginning of pre-season training and having very few kids to choose from when the season starts. So it's trying to just educate the coaches around the idea of maybe work on more tactical and technical in those first few sessions, maybe set a prescribed intensity where they allocate a certain amount of time to some sprints, but keep the sprints pretty small. And as they get used to those sprints, maybe go from the 10s and 10s up to 20-meter sprints, 30-meter sprints. And by the time they're nearly match fit and match ready, they'll be replicating the demands of the sport that they're going to play.
You're making too much sense, Answer Angela.
Oh, sorry. Would you like me to add more confusion? Because it's not that complex.
Yeah, it's really not. Yeah. And well, I think it sucks because coaches know what they don't know. But I also think there's this fear in that preseason week or two. Oh, we got to really get them in shape. We got to run them. But what's the point if you're going to have a handful of the squad sore or with an overuse injury that they're not even available for the first tournament or game? I'm trying to educate so much on this topic, and more coaches are starting to listen to it, but I just still think people just have that mindset, we need to cram this all in 1 week, and they don't understand the dangers of these huge spikes in load that these kids aren't prepared for. And a lot of coaches will be like, well, we just want to see who trained over the summer. And it's like, well, even in a well-trained athlete who did a progressed strength and conditioning plan in the summer, if you're having them do like 100 sprints on day one, that's just negligent. Like that's just stupid. So even well-trained athletes struggle with the nonsense.
I think we've still got lots of beliefs. I know last time we touched around the bone stress injuries, and you still hear coaches saying go hard or go home. You still hear coaches saying lighter is faster. And we know that all of these words that they're using, the kids hang on to them. And they kind of feel like they've got to impress and they've got to do what the coach says because they want to get picked. And so I think it's up to brilliant like formats like you're delivering here to have those guests on and say, you know what, there's a different way of doing it now. We've learned from our errors in the past. And just because that's what happened to us as child athletes doesn't mean we have to replicate those same beliefs and pathways in the modern athlete. And I think we understand now about maybe looking after that holistic viewpoint where we boost their capacity to do more as opposed to just doing more.
Mhm, mhm. Now, what can everyone do? Because I think it's hard because as a parent, maybe you listen to this podcast and you're like, you guys are making so much sense. The stuff coach had my daughter doing at practice is ridiculous. Like it was too high volume too soon. The girls' knees are hurting. Our team's dropping like flies. And like I get parents like they don't want to say something or micromanage the coach, which I don't really recommend that either. So it's like
No,
kind of
and neither do
a
I.
hard situation. So what can parents do without stepping on the coach's toes? How can they prepare their daughter best for that type of situation? Because it is really hard.
Hey guys, just want to take a quick moment to shout out our sponsor, Simply Faster, and one of my favorite speed timing systems from them, the Free Lap. I use it for my own sprint training as well as for my athletes, and they love it. It's super easy to set up, you can take it to the field on your own, and you can get accurate speed times to track your progress. Check the Free Lap link in the caption below to start adding timing into your speed sessions. If you know me, you know I love my Free Lap. If you're serious about speed, it's time to start timing.
And I think that you've hit on a really interesting point here. Number one is, as a parent myself, I was very mindful that I wanted to get my child used to articulating information to the coach. I don't think I did a great job. I think I probably did too much for them. But at some point, what we're trying to prepare is an athlete that's ready to go off to college and fight their own battles. So there's a part of it where we've got to try and support the child to feel like if they are sore, if they are. So I often use like 3 questions and you can translate this into American speak for me.
Okay.
So we often say to the parents, ask the kid as they come out of school or if they're going off to training, try and get an idea of how full their battery is on that day. Okay. So we might say to you, how sore are you out of 10, where 1 is like, I'm really, really sore. And 10 is, no, I feel great. Okay. And then how tired are you? And then the third one, how stressed are you? Now, if they're scoring like 1s and 2s, they're sore, they're stressed, they're tired, then there's a really good reason why you might then say, you know what, maybe we should just skip training today and we should just let the coach know that if you train today, there's a really high risk that you're going to get injured. They've maybe got a fever, they've got a cold, and they're kind of fretting that if they miss training, they'll get dropped or it won't look good or they'll let somebody down. But actually, if your kid's getting, they're sore, they're stressed, and they're tired, then those are the times when we know they won't tolerate the same load. And particularly at preseason where they're not got much capacity anyway, that's a risk. Or could they go and maybe just do some of the technical and tactical elements of the training, but sit out from all the high intensity stuff? So it depends on the format of the session. If they're scoring in the middle there, then we'd say, yeah, go to training. But before the coaching starts, just go and have a word with the coach and just let him know that you've got sore knees and that your physio has told them to try and go easy for a couple of days. If they're sort of scoring 4s and 5s across the board, they're basically like bouncing around like a bunny and they can go and train hard. So what we're trying to educate children is to communicate soreness or dropping capacity to their coaches. And we often combine those 3 into kind of telling kids that they've got a battery like a phone battery, and sometimes it's more depleted than others, and trying to think about how their performance is only going to be really, really good when the battery's pretty full. Their injury risk is going to be really, really high when their battery is on power saving mode. And can they learn to moderate their intensity? And kids quite often, they can't like choose how much volume to do. Quite often if they're in school or in their camp or whatever, then somebody else is dictating how long the session is, but the kid can determine how hard they go. And understanding that they're heroes, they're pros. So in the UK setting, I live near Manchester City, so I'm a fan of Manchester City. And I'll just pick one of the kids and always say to the kids, are you a Man United fan or are you a Man City fan, which are the two big teams near me? And we'll often say, like, who's your favorite player? And then, okay, so they played yesterday or they played on Saturday, and how hard out of 10 do you think they worked? And they'll usually say like 9 or 10. And then you say, well, how hard do you think they worked the next day? Do you think they went training? And they'll go, nah, they'd have had a rest day. Oh, that's pretty interesting. Do you do that after a hard session? No. But sometimes it's dictated by pitch availability that we end up with the kids doing like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then rest day Thursday, Friday. That's really tough on a young body. And we'd never do it to a professional soccer player. And yet, because of coach availability, kids availability, pitch availability, we end up sometimes having a situation where the competitive schedule means they play a match on a Sunday, they train hard on a Monday. That's not ideal, and it's nobody's fault. It is what it is in junior sport, but it doesn't mean it's right with the science.
That's such a good point, that the pros are getting more recovery than kids nowadays.
Yeah, in Europe, we try to aim for no more than 2 matches a week. They'll train light after the match days. So, mid-season, those guys are going to be doing max 2 hard sessions a week in competition and absolute maximum 2 hard sessions a week in training.
Yeah. It's so crazy, but I think you give such really good advice on, again, parents, like, please don't micromanage the coach and tell them their preseason's
Nope.
ridiculous. Just don't do that. It is ridiculous. It is what it is. But Angela, your advice is so great. Let the kid kind of manage their intensity within practice if their battery really is that low, because we know that fatigue leaves them at that higher risk for injury. And as you were talking there, I was thinking, like, they can even volunteer at practice, like, okay, I'll be the target player. I'll just stand. I won't be doing all the running in the small side game. I'll be the target player. Or maybe you'll be the neutral player. Like, just find ways to kind of like manage that and not always be involved in the high speed running if you're really that low with your battery. I think that's such good advice. And I've never heard that one before. So I think it's really great.
So we have on the Kids Back to Sport website, there's a free resource saying why do kids get injured? And we go into, like, there's loads of free resources for parents on the site. And what we often say to, if they're worried about a coach maybe just being a little bit over enthusiastic, then maybe download the resources that we have on the site and just wing that over to the coach and say, I got signposted to this and I found it really, really useful. I wondered if other parents might find it useful, and hopefully the coach will read it. And so sometimes, there's a whole course there for coaches and parents and like parent helpers and PE teachers to follow on understanding injuries on our site. And they may whet their appetite to kind of think, I'd like to learn more about Osgoods. I'd like to learn more about severs. And so we've done like a course that's more directed at that level, just to help say, well, when can I play with pain? When can't I? When should I push a kid? When can't I push a kid?
And that was my next question. So, in terms of pain, when do we know, okay, it's fine to play in this game this weekend or this tournament, or maybe I should sit out? When should we know? Like, what are some signs?
So, in terms of, we said that prior to the big growth spurt, the feet will start growing first. So, we're expecting our what we call overuse injuries, APOP injuries at the tendon insertion, to occur around the foot and ankle first. Those muscles aren't very big. They're not that strong. And so there's no real major risk of them being made that much worse by exercise. But there are some rules. When we move up to the knee, the muscles are getting a bit bigger, but still, generally, we find that those that present with Osgoods, now, just to give you a sort of explanation of what happens at the knee, the big thigh muscle, the quadriceps, comes and makes an envelope round the kneecap. At the very bottom of the kneecap, where our quads tendon starts, is an APOP, and that's called Sinding-Larsen's. So you may have heard of that. So Sinding-Larsen's is at the top of the tendon where the kneecap is, and Osgood's is at the bottom of the tendon where that knobbly bit is on the top of the shin bone. Okay, so you've got two injuries that we can get there. And we also get that the little fat pad that sits behind the tendon, that can get swollen and irritated as well. And so can the kneecap. But all of these can be managed in much the same way. So foot and ankle and these knee APOP injuries, we can usually say that they can play with what I would call mild pain. Now, kids aren't great at managing to understand what a 1 out of 10 is, a 2 out of 10 is. And when they're playing, they're kind of ignoring it anyway. So we have to have another rule that says, well, how does mum and dad or the coach recognize when this has gone more than a mild pain? And that's usually that it makes them limp or move differently. So if we start to see a kid suddenly like running awkwardly, they're not moving freely, they've lost their speed, then maybe you kind of recognize that they are probably now moving into a moderate level of pain, that they're struggling to just still carry on in the same way. Now, the kid's not going to go, I need to come off now. But the coach and the parent can kind of recognize that maybe that's enough for today. And so we usually say a mild pain that doesn't cause them to move in a different way. And it must settle within an hour. So it must settle quickly and it must be no worse the next day. And if they've tolerated that, then great, they can try again the next day. If they haven't tolerated it, try moving to either an every other day training mantra. Like, we don't really want these kids with these overuse injuries to stop. Because if you get a child to rest, we all know if we don't go to the gym for 4 weeks, we end up having to start at a lower level again. We've deconditioned. So for the most part, as long as we know confidently that there's no stress fracture risk, then we can happily get these kids to carry on playing, providing they are coping. And by that, they can tick box that the pain is mild, it doesn't cause them to move in a different way, and it settles real quick, and it's no worse the next day. If they can't meet that criteria, then they go to lower intensity training, less of it. So go every other day or every third day. And then if they still aren't settling, they may need a 2-week break. They can try putting ice on, but it's absolutely essential that they don't take anti-inflammatory medication, because that changes the way in which the tendon heals. Doesn't speed things up. It might even slow things down. And it will mask the pain. So there's no way that we should be taking like painkillers or anti-inflammatories ahead of playing. And if you're needing them after you've played, you've done too much. There's no way that pain is settling within an hour of stopping if you're having to give them pain meds. Now, when we move, go ahead.
There's a lot you talked about there, and I've heard this one before, that a female athlete will take off for 3 months after getting Osgood-Schlatter, and then she goes back, pain right back, and people are like, we're so confused, we took off. And it's like, well, you shouldn't have taken a complete 3 months to shut it down, do nothing, and then you put her in the same environment again that caused it, and she's going 100 miles per hour again. I don't think people are thinking about the spike in load, and it needs to be, like you said, a gradual lowering of the intensity to see if the pain kind of resolves a little bit, and then slowly build back up while doing your strength training, sleep, good nutrition.
Yeah. So all the time is we're trying to find a level that they're coping with. The more we boost the battery with good sleep, good nutrition, stuff like that, strength training, then we're going to give them more tolerance. But if we just drop them off a cliff and send them off doing nothing and then go back at the exact same level of training, it just goes to this, does a boom and bust culture kind of translate?
Yes.
So that's what we see, this roller coaster of pain spikes, rest, pain spikes, rest. And there's research out there that says Osgood's, with these kind of approaches, maybe could last like 3 years. Now, I have very, very few children. If we can keep them getting stronger, we can boost their capacity, and we can find a level of training that they can cope with. We don't have many kids that last that long. Every growth spurt, it might recur a little bit, but we then apply the same principles and we get them back on track again.
Yeah.
But certainly kind of going, you'll grow out of it. Well, that's a really long time. Kids don't finish growing till maybe they're 20.
Yeah.
So we don't want to go, you're going to grow out of it. We don't want you to go do nothing, because none of that is going to help. It just drops their capacity even lower. So then the spike in activity becomes even greater.
Mm-hmm. I just really love this advice that they need to find a level of training that they can cope with, and the pain's not ruining their speed or their movement quality. I think that's so good. And so for the parents listening, if you have a young girl who's maybe in soccer season and then maybe she's doing a ton of skills training sessions on top of her practices and games, and she still has knee pain, maybe cut back one skill session just a little bit at a time and see how. Is that what you would recommend? Just one bit at a time to see if she responds?
It's kind of like, trying to think of it as finding the right level of maybe medication. Sometimes you need a little bit higher dose, sometimes you need a little bit less. And what's the optimal prescription, exercise prescription, that works for this athlete? And we went back to that mantra of, should we buy into the 12-year-olds do 12 hours? Well, a 12-year-old that is eating well, sleeping well, has been training for many, many years. We call it their training history. How many years have they been at it? They're going to have more resilience. So if that 12-year-old is in great shape, they're not injured, and basically they've put the hours in and the years in, then a 12-year-old might be able to do 20 hours of training. But equally, a 12-year-old who's relatively new to it, or they've had a period of time off through injury, and maybe they've got some digestive issues and they're not great sleepers, well, maybe they can tolerate 1 hour. So age isn't relevant. And within a squad, you've then got those kids who are early developers, and maybe they're a little bit stronger. But you might have a kid who's maybe 3, 4, or 5 years behind another kid in that same age group, and they're really going to find it tough to keep up. And so they're working a lot harder, and they're going to get injured more readily.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to touch on the nutrition piece because this one is so, so important. So can you just talk about what is going on physiologically with overuse injuries when athletes are under eating and they don't have the energy availability? Why are they more susceptible to Osgood-Schlatter or severs?
So I think the important kind of messaging is, any child who is not getting enough energy for what they do, they're under fueling for the performance. So they are way more at risk of any injury to specifically the bone. And what we've been saying here is the majority of these overuse injuries are either bone stress or a stress on the point where the tendon attaches to the bone. So it's bone again. So when we're starting to think about overuse injuries that involve bones, then we are essentially thinking about having a good intake of carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are bone's best friend, in much the same way as we got very excited about protein and how important protein was for muscle growth. I think we got obsessed with protein at the cost of carbohydrates. And I think carbohydrates for kids are just so, so important, particularly those slow release carbohydrates, having a mixture of carbs, and trying to get kids not to think about calories, but thinking about fueling for performance. If they're performing at the top of their game, they're not injured, they're not getting lots of sore throats and viruses, then effectively we can be pretty confident that they're getting enough energy to perform. But if they're starting to get niggly illnesses, they're starting to get niggly injuries, then we start to kind of question what's going on inside that might put them way more at risk of injury. If we're talking about getting these niggly injuries, then we need repair. So we do need that protein intake. So kids need this balanced diet that's probably going to put them into a bit of surplus for the amount of sport that they do, so that they've got adequate energy for growth, they've got adequate energy for performance, and also just doing all the normal stuff to keep us healthy.
Mhm. I'm really glad you brought up just like every macronutrient. And I think with carbohydrates, it's so key for them to be able to get those minerals and B vitamins and all the good stuff.
Yep.
Because I think with like bone, everyone's like, oh, just vitamin D, calcium only. But there's way much more to bone than just those two micronutrients.
I think a really important one for the girls is iron.
Hmm.
So I think there's iron is a big thing with bone, and so I think we need to make sure that we have open discussions with the girls around if those that are getting very heavy periods, then they could certainly during the period and maybe the week after, they may well be in a bit of iron deficit, and that can leave the bone more vulnerable. We also have a situation where we're being told as a world um, uh, population to limit our red meat intake. And that's yet a really key source for us to get our iron. When we're vegan, vegetarian, how do we get those good iron sources? So I think it's important to recognize that, yes, vitamin D is needed. But if you're a good parent, you're probably slapping sun cream all over them, and we shouldn't be leaving them out in the sun. So we can't always get it from our natural environment. And so being aware, if your child's very tired, could they be missing some of these really key, like sort of the vitamin D, the iron, the calcium, magnesium, and maybe just ask their doctor to run some bloods and just check where they're at with that.
Yeah. Yeah, so important. I'm glad you mentioned magnesium too, because it is one a lot of people tend to forget about with vitamin D absorption and bone health. But
Mhm.
yeah, thank you for touching on all of that. Is there anything else you would say with the nutrition piece? I mean, this one, so even though like there's a bunch of nonsense happening at practice and preseason and load spiking, the nutrition piece is very controllable for people. So
It is.
yeah,
Yeah,
I
one of
think
my favorite expressions, control the controllables.
that's it. Yeah, and that's all a lot of us can do. So I think with the nutrition, I guess for busy sports parents, what would you say when they're like, "Well, it's really hard for us to get all the energy in and eat healthy?" Like, because I get that one a lot, and I get people are busy, but I mean, we want to make sure our kids are resilient.
So I think a nice easy fix is if the kid can drink milk,
Mm,
then like a glass of milk at every meal gives you some carbohydrates. I used to always have we have a product called Nesquik, and it's like a powder for strawberry or chocolate flavor, and you can just put it into some milk and make an instant milkshake. And so my kids used to have like milk powder and the flavored stuff and a bottle of water, and they'd make themselves a shake at school when they were doing practices and stuff. But mostly, to see whether you can get some milk inside them. And then it gets to being really like, I used to give my kids an extra sandwich every day. So they would have I think what we need to think about, I quite often liken it to a training pot of energy and then a health pot of energy. So I eat 3 times a day. I have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that's just to keep me healthy. That's not for my sport. On top of that, I need stuff for growth if I'm a kid. And then on top of that, I need my training fuel. So most kids will need to eat probably, maybe 5 times a day because their tummies are smaller. And so in the car, I always used to have like flapjacks or some, as I say, some milkshakes and things like that. So there would always be like a big Tupperware full of snacks in the boot, and I just fill it up every weekend and just make sure that we always had something to grab. So that was always good. I think taking an extra like snack that's available so they don't necessarily reach for the chocolate bars and the crisps. So just making sure that on the days where they're going to do more exercise or higher intensity, that you put more sandwiches, more wraps, different types of fuels that they'll eat. Could you put an extra banana in their bag that day? So kind of fluctuate it a little bit. So on a day where they're not doing much sport, they don't need more fuel. what we do know is if you know that they've got a heavy tournament coming up, the 2 days prior to that tournament, front end them with energy. Think about what you're going to feed them for supper the night before a tournament. You'd be better off doing a big sort of chicken pasta dish and not going out for pizza that night, because the pizza's not going to give them long-term energy. But those high carbohydrates, high protein meals that you're preparing for the 2 nights prior are going to make a massive difference. So a little bit is around prep. Lots of kids eat toast and stuff. I'll always say, what can you put on it to give you more energy? Could you put peanut butter on it? Could you put like chocolate spread and a banana on it? And so it's just always thinking about the quick fixes. Avocado in a sandwich boosts the calorie intake. So it's just looking for easy wins, really.
I love all those ideas, and I'm glad you started off with milk, because I think dairy is just like so underrated now, but it is a really great easy snack, whether it's a milkshake, or I don't know if you guys have like the string cheese packs out where you are, but kids love those and they taste great. So if you can do dairy, then do it. I mean, I think there's this fear around dairy with like people who aren't allergic to it. They're like, oh, dairy is gonna cause acne or sinus issues. Not in everyone.
No.
I think it's more fear mongering than actual legitimate truth. So if you're not allergic to dairy, try it.
But also things like Greek yogurt.
Mhm.
So we have a lot of pouches with like little sort of twisty tops, and we can get yogurt in those, and you can get the slightly higher protein yogurts. But Greek yogurt hasn't got as much lactose in anyway, so you tolerate it better because it's been strained and things. But it's an incredibly powerful source of calcium, energy, protein. It's just a great food. So I think that would be good.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, yeah, I think the nutrition piece is such a big one. And would you say that a lot of athletes that you come across, are most of them underfueled?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I
Yep.
see it all the time, and everyone's like, "Oh, like strength training's gonna save me," and I'm like, "Yeah, but you're not eating enough."
So we kind of think in terms of, we used to talk about this protein window where kids just had to make sure they got protein after they trained, but actually you need to front end it as well.
Mm.
So if we, take like a kid who maybe weighs 50 kilograms, they need to be thinking about getting 50 or 60 grams of protein and plenty of carbohydrates each day, like from all the food groups. But what you need to do then is split it up. So maybe 15 at breakfast, 15 at lunch, 15 at training, 15 in the evening, because that's how their little bodies can utilize it best. So it's just trying to kind of recognize that their tummies aren't quite the same as adults, that their needs are very different because of growth. They burn through energy the amount they do. They're often playing multiple sports in the day. And so they probably sometimes, some kids may need double what their mum needs. And it's looking at their family and going, well, today, little Johnny's not got any sport, so he doesn't need such a big portion. But actually, hang on, he's got a tournament tomorrow. And then Mary's got this going on, so she maybe needs an extra sandwich today. And it's a lot for parents to take on board, but it's kind of going, I wouldn't drive my car in like hard and fast and not put fuel in it. I'd expect to break down. And the child is much the same. If we drive it economically, the fuel lasts longer. If we go hard and fast, which is kids, they're going to burn through it way, way quicker than us adults.
Now, anything else you would add just to wrap this up, just speaking to the parents about overuse injuries?
Yeah. So I think we've kind of given the idea that you and I were keen to talk around the common things we see. And just to be clear, we've used the proper name for these overuse growth plate injuries, which is an APOP or apophysis. But traditionally, Dr. Severs decided to adopt a condition at the heel. And so he gave it that name. And we quite often hear Severs disease. This is not a disease.
Mm-hmm.
So Osgood-Schlatter's disease, it's not a disease. It's an overuse or a undercapacity injury to the growth tissue, and managed right, these guys can settle down and do really, really well. And primarily there, we've looked at what happens at the foot and ankle and the knee. But as the kid goes through puberty and that thigh bone starts to grow, the hamstring muscles and the quads muscles, particularly in boys, get a bit more testosterone, and they start to get really big and strong. Those levers are longer, those muscles are stronger. And what we tend to see is where the muscles like the hamstrings and the inner thigh, the adductors, and the quadriceps at the front, where those attach around the pelvic bones, those tendons often get sort of a real tug on them when kids kick the ball really hard or they accelerate really hard. And they are more at risk of actually pulling away a few millimeters. And we call that an avulsion injury. And that's really rare in the calf. It's really rare in the knee. But once we move up around the pelvis, because of this growth, strength, levers, we tend to find that some of these muscles can actually end up with what we call an avulsion fracture. And that just means that the rules change. So if we are basically looking at pain, really localized, sometimes these kids feel like a popping sensation as that little growth plate just comes away from the parent bone. And these aren't massive. They don't suddenly go sort of slinging down their leg. It's just a small amount of separation. But if the kid carries on playing, carries on stretching, and they've got one of these very mild avulsion injuries, then that will basically get bigger, and that will put them out for maybe 4 to 6 months. So it's really important that a kid who's getting pain around the heel, pain around the knee, usually we'll be happy with them adhering to the mild pain, settles down really quickly when they stop. But around the pelvis, I have a totally different set of rules. And if we're worried about a bone stress injury like the shin splints or what we call medial tibial stress syndrome, so pain on a bone, not at the muscle attachment, any bone pain and any pain around the hip and pelvis, that needs to be checked by a physical therapist before the decision can be made that they can play with pain. So it's quite a simple rule. Things that behave like an overuse injury, they're worse on activity, they settle with rest, and then they get worse again, and then they settle again. Those are usually okay to manage with a low degree of pain. But anything that looks more like low back pain that we covered last time on the podcast, any actual bone pain, and any pain around the pelvis and the hip area, that needs checking before you can play with pain.
That's very helpful. And I'll actually leave that episode we did on low back pain and bone stress injuries in the caption below. So if you haven't watched that, I highly recommend it. That was a really fun conversation with some great action items for parents and athletes. Angela, this was such a fun discussion. I always love having you on. You are the expert in all these topics with youth training and injuries. So I'm sure maybe we'll come up with another topic and have you back on again, but I really appreciate you coming on.
And thank you for the invitation. You know, I get so excited sharing all the information. I hope it's all been clear, and people can find me at Kids Back to Sport. We often, after the podcast, get a email from people, and I was really grateful because I was able to help somebody who'd listened to our low back pain from America. She's based in the States, and she reached out because she found the information so helpful for our chat, and it's really helped her kid get on the right track. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
That makes me so happy. And that's why I love sharing just amazing guests with people, because I know a lot of people listening, they have these issues that we talk about and they just need some help and some specific guidance. So if your daughter has Osgood-Schlatter or Severs or maybe an avulsion injury, please reach out to Angela. I'll also leave your Kids Back to Sport website. It's such a great resource. Parents, please share it, and maybe coaches will start reading some of this information too. So yeah, we're just trying to impact and help everyone we can. So thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.